Can you be deceived by a plot? Oh, actually, let me rephrase that. Can you be deceived by a good plot? No. And yes. How's that for an answer? So in my last video, I talked about simple slopes analysis, and I basically mentioned that my approach is to visualize first and then build the models based on the visuals. And I had two comments that were kind of sort of saying the same thing. I don't know if I like this approach or not. If we let visuals guide our model specification, then we make modeling choices based on noisy sample data. In a way, that would be like first looking at your dices and then asking whether your visual intuition is transferable to the real world. But in deciding this, you estimate a model based on the same data. Valid point. Comment number 2. I don't know if I entirely agree with the plot first, model second approach. I am often not interested in data-driven models, but rather in certain theories that I will model and test with data to see if my theory is supported. Torture the data enough and it will reveal anything. And both of them are kind of sort of saying the same thing, that if you start with visuals, isn't that kind of just P hacking? But like V hacking? Because you're using visuals? And those are valid concerns. And visuals can fool you, but not in the way that you think. Let's look at an example. So here we have a statistically significant slope. Yay! Now let's look at the visuals. So which was more deceptive, the statistics or the visuals? Definitely the statistics. So if we are using good visuals, they do not trick us. They keep us humble. So if the signal is weak, your visuals will show that unless you intentionally bias them, like SPSS does by default, where it zooms in on the confidence interval of two groups. Like in this example, here's the raw data, and then here's the SPSS graph. So yeah, plots can deceive you, but if you're using good plots, they shouldn't. Instead, they should highlight the vulnerabilities of your model. Having said that, visuals do have a weakness. They are prone to identifying spurious correlations that actually exist in the dataset, but don't exist in the population. Or in other words, if you have overfit your sample data, your visuals will show that. Or in other words, your visuals are prone to overfitting. Why? Because in the sample, it's actually there. So just to step back a little bit, visuals are not good visuals. Again, if they're good visuals, they will not deceive you by inflating something that is actually there, because they actually highlight misfit in the model. But they do have a weakness that if this is a unique pattern in your data set that's not going to replicate, there's no way the visual is going to know that. And so yeah, it's going to say, wow, this is a strong slope in this sample. I don't know what it's going to look like in other samples, but in this sample, it looks really good. And yeah, visuals can't protect you from that, but neither can p-values or effect sizes. And there are some statistics out there that try to assess the replicability of findings, like with cross-validation metrics and that sort of thing. But all that to say that visuals are not specifically prone to this problem. All statistics are prone to this overfitting problem. And I will also say that this isn't really a new argument. This exact same kind of pushback that I was getting has been happening for decades. So to understand that, let's step back to like the 1950s, 1940s, 1930s. During the McCarthy era. I actually wrote a paper about this, and I'll link that in the description. So statistics was dominated by Fisher and Neyman and Pearson. And these people and the scientific community at large was really obsessed with the idea of objectivity. And so as statistics was in its infancy, the leaders in statistical thought were also very concerned with objectivity. In fact, that's why Bayesian statistics took so long to become more prevalent, because the early founders of statistics hated the subjectivity inherent in Bayesian statistics. And so statisticians invented a workflow that was aimed to eliminate personal bias, which you can't eliminate personal bias, but they tried. And so basically how it went is you assume a model, you test that model, and then you report the p-values. And importantly, you didn't poke around at your data first. You didn't look at it. And you certainly didn't plot it, because plotting is subjective. Whatever interpretation you're going to use, there's no way to make it objective if you're just looking at a plot. So under that paradigm, we had this way of approaching data analysis that we really tried to be objective, and we hated plots. And then there was a fellow by the name of John Tukey who came along. And what John Tukey noticed, he was one of those rare people that worked both in industry and in academia. And he noticed that this like highbrow way of doing things, this objective modeling approach, just did not work on real data. And one thing that he said is that what we tend to do in statistics is we compute very precise answers to the wrong questions. Now, what does he mean? Well, it's best to understand what he means by thinking about an example. So let's say we have the following research question. Does exercise improve one's fitness level? And for whom does exercise improve fitness? Now that is just a verbal theory, or it's a verbal research question. Eventually, we're going to have to translate that into mathematical terms, or the way that I like to say is we mathematize it. And so maybe we fit a model that looks like this. Fitness is equal to B0 plus B1 exercise plus B2 age. And then maybe we decide to focus in on this parameter here, the B1, exercise. Well, now our question has changed. Now the question is, what is the average linear effect of exercise once we control for age? That is a much narrower question than what we were originally asking. It's much more specific, and it's mathematically clean. So then we fit the model and get a summary that might look like this. And we look at the estimate and say, wow, exercise, it's statistically significant. Hooray! Then what we do is we then conclude, okay, exercise improves fitness. Bam! Tell that to the newspapers, yo. But do you see the problem? We asked a broad question about the effect of exercise on fitness. Then we answered a very narrow one that could be mathematically defined, which was the linear slope of exercise on fitness after controlling for age. And then the answer that we report goes back to our broad framing. Yes, exercise improves fitness. So once again, we started with a broad question, made it very specific in order to model it, and then now whatever conclusions we glean from this very specific answer, we then try to transport that back to our original question, which was much broader. And why is that problematic? Well, let's look at an example of why that might be problematic. Let's say the relationship actually looked like this, where we see that the effect of exercise on fitness completely depends on age. And for old people, it actually reduces their fitness level. So we received a very precise answer, which was that the slope was 0.9 or whatever it was, and the p-value was less than 0.0001. So we received that precise answer to the wrong question, which asked about the linear slope of exercise on fitness. And the model didn't even tell us that that analysis was totally misleading, because we clearly have an interaction effect here. And clearly, exercise is not good for fitness for all age groups in this fictitious example. And so Tukey noticed things like this, and you notice that models were often just wrong. And despite the models being dead wrong, they still gave very precise answers that people kind of hung their hats on and said, wow, I've got a great model. That's problematic. So what Tukey was pushing back against wasn't modeling per se. It wasn't math. It wasn't even p-values or hypothesis testing or any of that. He was pushing back against the mindset that if it is statistically significant, we are done. Because Tukey's issue was that, yeah, you can get p-values, you can get very nice coefficients, but they could be completely meaningless. We might get those coefficients or those p-values even when the math doesn't match our research question. And even when the relationship is nonlinear, or when there's interaction effects, or when there are subgroups, or when the assumptions are violated. So Tukey argued that when you're building a model, you're not just analyzing data. You are also choosing the research question that your model will attempt to answer. And you'd better make sure that that question that it's answering is a legitimate question. And really, I guess it all comes down to that the danger is not just having a bad model, it's making unnoticed decisions. So Tukey's solution to all this was just look at the data. A very simple answer. And his original idea wasn't, hey, let's just look at the data and explore something and see if we find something interesting. That's what people later thought he was saying, but that's not what he was saying. He was really interested in whether the model was actually describing reality. And so in order to understand whether the model was identifying reality, he invented things like box plots and residual analysis and transformations guided by the shape of the data. And all these were an attempt to identify where the model might be wrong. But like I said, this unfortunately got misinterpreted. So Tukey originally said we use plots to challenge or evaluate the model, but what people heard is that EDA, or exploratory data analysis, is informal, subjective, and uses a lot of plots. And they also thought that CDA was formal, objective, and led to theory validation or whatever. And so we ended up with this weird dichotomy that people misunderstand today, where they assume that EDA is based on plots and it's all about discovery and it's subjective, and CDA is based on models and it uses testing and it's objective. But that's not at all what Tukey really meant. Now, let me go back to the original comments that people left. So the commenters legitimately were worried about overfitting and seeing patterns and noise. I don't think that's a problem. Like I said, good visuals highlight the noise, not exacerbate patterns that aren't actually there. And these commenters were definitely worried about double dipping. Totally legitimate concerns. But I think inherent in their comment is the assumption that we start with a theory, then we fit the model, then we test it, and there's this clean sequence of events that we go through. But that's not how it works. And let me just give you an example where a model can quietly fail. Let's say we fit this model, y tilde t times x. And then if we look at the summary of that model, we see, oh no, p-value is not statistically significant. Boo. So we got a non-existent interaction effect. But if we were to plot that data, now looking at the plot, do we have an interaction effect? Absolutely we have an interaction effect, but the model was testing whether we have a linear interaction effect. But this isn't a linear interaction effect. It's a non-linear interaction effect. So once again, we asked, how is the relationship between x and y affected by treatment? That was our research question. Then our statistical model evaluated the slope of the linear effect of the product of x and t. And then from that, we concluded the XY relationship is unaffected by treatment, or it doesn't vary by treatment. So once again, we got a very precise answer, which is the slope of the product of the X times T interaction effect, which is a very different question than what we were trying to actually answer. And in this, if we just look at the model, it looked fine. There was no signal to indicate that we did anything wrong. But when we plot it, it definitely shows that it's wrong. So if you try to make the argument, well, I just let theory guide you. Well, eventually, you're going to have to translate that theory into a mathematical model. And there's lots and lots of different mathematical models you can choose based on a verbal theory. So it's not enough just to have theory guide you, because it can lead to all sorts of different decisions that will have different conclusions, which is why you need to plot the data. So there's nothing wrong with visuals. It's not like they're biased. It's not like they're specifically prone to overfitting. I mean, and that's not their point, to evaluate the overfittingness of a model. Their purpose is to expose the model's assumptions. And implicit in all this, the real problem with data analysis, whether it be visualizing or computing statistical significance or whatever, is double dipping. And what does that mean? Meaning that we visualize a pattern and then we do a confirmatory test to prove that what we found is actually there. That would be like going outside with a metal detector, finding treasure, reburying it, and then predicting where the treasure is. Well, you already found the treasure. Of course it's going to be there. So if you find something through a graphic, and then you later report the statistical significance of that as if you hadn't found it in the first place visually, yeah, that's a problem. I agree. And that's where inference is going to break. But you also have the same problem if you ask the computer to find the most statistically significant predictor variable, and then report it as if that's all you tested. That's problematic too. So what should you do? Well, it does depend on whether you're in confirmatory or exploratory mode. In confirmatory mode, the most important element is whether you have specified things in advance. And so if that's the critical distinction between confirmatory and exploratory, then obviously your plots should not guide your choice of the model, because that indicates that you made decisions after looking at the data. So yeah, I agree. That's problematic if you're in strictly confirmatory mode. But that doesn't mean that plots don't play a role. And really, the ordering doesn't matter. You could look at them first if you want, or you could look at them after you fit the data. It doesn't matter. But whether you do it first or second, it doesn't matter. They play a diagnostic role in that case. And so we visualize the data and find out, okay, is the model that we pre-specified, is that actually a good model to use? And if the plot suggests that the model that you chose is a bad model, then we have to pivot. And guess what? We're no longer in confirmatory mode. So if you are in strictly confirmatory mode, we still use plots. We just use them differently. We use them more as a diagnostic. And let me just briefly, I've talked about this a lot. I'm going to briefly talk about it again. Here's the thing with confirmatory data analysis. When we are doing confirmatory data analysis, we are relying heavily on probabilities, whether it be p-values or confidence intervals or Bayes factors or whatever. And these probabilities are only meaningful if we are in strict CDA mode, or in other words, if we pre-specified everything in advance. So that means we specify the analysis and we specify the sample size in advance. And the way that I like to think about it is it's as if it's an R script that you just hit run without modifying anything. If you are at that point where you're ready for that, then yeah, you can do strict CDA mode and then plots play a different role. But here's the thing. Almost nobody is ever ready for strict CDA mode. There's almost always going to be slight or even massive modifications of your analysis plan. So you might need to remove outliers, or you might need to do a transformation on a variable, or you might need to add a covariate or remove a covariate or use a different dependent variable or throw out some data, whatever. All these things almost always happen. It's very rare that you are completely ready for strictly confirmatory data analysis. So in that situation, if we are in that very rare exception where it's strict CDA mode, then I agree. It does not make sense to choose the model based on the visuals because the model should have already been chosen. But once again, visuals still play a role. They play a diagnostic role because we need to make sure that the model's assumptions are still met. And if they're not, then we have to exit confirmatory data analysis entirely. And so because confirmatory data analysis is so rare, most of my videos assume that you are not in strict confirmatory data analysis mode. If I were to do the video over again, I might say, oh, by the way, I'm talking specifically about everything but strict CDA mode, which is very rare. In which case, everything that I said, I still completely agree with, that we should let the visuals guide the choice of models. So let me now restate my original idea in light of this new information. What I was criticizing when I was talking about simple slopes analysis, I was criticizing the use of plots as an afterthought. Where somebody says, oh, look, there's an interaction effect. I wonder what that looks like. Let me do a simple slopes analysis. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a bad idea. I was suggesting that we put visuals at the forefront. And that often means that we iterate between models and visuals and models, and go back and forth. So the plot informs us what type of models we ought to fit. Maybe it's an interaction effect. Maybe there's a nonlinear component. Maybe we need to fit a threshold model. I don't know, whatever. Then we fit those models. And then we use the visuals again to then evaluate whether the model that we fit is actually appropriate for the data. So here's the key takeaways. When Tukey first started talking about exploratory data analysis, he wasn't saying, trust your eyes and that's all. What he was saying is don't trust your model without checking it first. And by the way, that's exactly what I'm saying. So just to close this out, models answer the questions that you ask them to give you answers to. And that may or may not be reflective of what you really want to know. And plots help you see if that question that you're asking should actually be asked. And hey, if you want to get better at asking questions and making models and specifying models and using visuals to guide your analysis, guess what? I've got classes, simplistics classes. I got live classes. I don't know when my next live class is coming up, but you can see the link in the description. And if that doesn't work for you, you could always do a self-guided class. So I hope to see you in one of those classes. And until next time, peace out. I don't like it no more. I've got Lord of the Rings playing in the background. Yeah, that's aged well, hasn't it? Wouldn't you say, wouldn't you say? So then it becomes even more trickier. Even more trickier. Like even more tricky, but trickier. If you only have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail for you. If you only have a nail, does everything look like a hammer though? That's really the deep philosophical question of the age. First person to answer that gets a Nobel Prize, baby. I don't know, but I'm going to focus. I don't care. Whatever. Let's go.